New research shows executives using ChatGPT make worse predictions than those who simply talk to their colleagues. Today, we're exploring why tools designed to make us smarter could actually be eroding our ability to think. Hello and welcome to this ICA in Conversation that broadcasts on the second and fourth Wednesdays of each month and focuses on current issues and challenges in the context of compliance and counter financial crime. I'm Ben Jones, and coming up, we're going to be discussing human skills in an AI-enabled future. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Eccleson, who is a behavioural psychologist who has worked in many high-level risk and compliance roles. Good afternoon, Paul. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, pleasure, Ben. Nice to meet you. Hi.
As always, I'm really interested to know your questions, so please do send them through. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat as we go through. So this In Conversation webinar follows a fascinating discussion between Paul and my colleague Tim Tyler in August that considered why we're capable of poor decision making in the workplace. We talked about groupthink and team dynamics. We talked about the lazy brains, biases in our thinking, and we talked about the incremental poor decision making in the context of corruption and maybe moral discomfort. This webinar is going to go further. We're going to be considering some of the same issues, but in particular context of an AI-enabled workplace. We're going to seek to understand how the widespread use of AI may actually impact on our cognitive skills. Paul, do you think that's a fair summary? I know it's been very difficult to be certain about how AI is going to develop and what the impact is going to be. I know this is an area that you've got a keen interest in. So have you got any thoughts on the impact of AI that you've seen?
Yeah, it's obviously a very pertinent topic because AI is being used in so many different ways now. Ben, I mean, if you think back 3 years ago, the concept of logging onto a Chat GPT session, asking it to write a policy for you, it's capable of doing that. So it's probably worth focusing, I think, to begin with, what large language models and generative AI is very, very, very good at the moment. And I think that kind of centers on what I've called guided synthesis. So guided in the sense that at the moment, the conversations you have to have and the prompts you have to write and the sketches you have to give AI are really extremely detailed. So you have to guide it. AI generally doesn't just produce this stuff on its own. You have to give it really very close, confined and defined instructions, because that's what you're doing, for it to produce something useful. It's a really good example of this. And you don't try it now because you've got to listen to me. But if you ask one of these AIs that can generate images to generate you an image of an analog clock face, i.e. one with hands, with the time of, choose your time, 6:15, 6:45, and watch what it does. Pretty much all of them will produce you a clock face that hasn't got 6:45 and 6:30 on it. It's got 10 past 10. And the reason for that is every image pretty much of an analog clock face that you will see in the press or in marketing or throughout advertising history has got a smiley face on it, because smiley faces appeal to human beings. And so the only watches that AI has ever seen, in inverted commas, are ones where the time is 10 past 10. Now, you have to force it to then go, no, what I meant was, okay, the big hand has to be down pointing at the 6, and you have to really be specific in order for it to do that thing. So at the moment, a lot of these things require quite a lot of human guidance anyway.
Yeah.
And then the second part of that statement was synthesis, which is based on that it can only ever use the stuff that it's had from its database. Now, it's huge. I know that large language
Mhm.
models have access to huge amounts of normally Western English text, which again causes biases. We know that. But it synthesizes from stuff it already knows. And so danger number one when you're working with AI in a decision making context is to use the old adage, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. And AI does have that tendency. And there's a growing amount of research in decision making right now that's saying if you mix human decision making together with AI, what happens is humans get a bit lazy. They
Mhm.
rely on the AI to produce all of these bright ideas for them. They don't bother thinking about it. That goes back to what we were talking about lazy brains. But AI is only ever going to produce stuff it's already known about.
Mhm.
And it actually reduces and flattens the creativity of a team. And there's a growing amount of research that says if you give teams AI, you get fast results, but you get slightly boring ideas. Whereas if you give it to human beings, then actually you get a lot more of that beautiful human creativity coming out. And a reliance on AI can flatten the response in those countries. So I think it's a genuine concern that you raised, which was let's not lose this human ability to create and be innovative in the process of our lazy brains just devolving the responsibility to someone else.
So I guess it's really producing things which are very plausible, but it's really producing like a almost like a consensus engine on everything that's ever gone before. So in that case, my question would be, what then happens when we're facing genuine, unprecedented situations where these past patterns don't apply?
So excellent question, because if it's a genuinely new problem that you're facing, or it requires a genuinely creative solution, then perhaps the best way to use our AI colleagues is not in that generative process, because it'll only ever come up with solutions it's seen
Mhm.
before, but actually to test the ones that the humans produce afterwards. So in a risk and compliance setting, for example, you could say, look, this is our scenario, this is the business plan we have, this is the business model we have. What would you do if you were a competitor? And ask that question of the AI. What might our competitors respond to this idea that we've just made? Or can you challenge me with the risks and problems that if we do this action, what are the consequences of us taking that action on customers, consumers, our competitors, the regulator, etc., and use it in a challenging way to feed our own particular creativity. And it's rather like kind of reverse stress testing. It's saying, can you think of a way to break this? And AI has a role to go, yeah, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Other people have tried this to broaden the way in which we respond rather
Mhm.
than rely on it generating the responses. And I think that's a kind of growing use of AI is to have the best of human creativity, but actually then allow it to go, sure, I've seen examples of X, Y, and Z. Are you sure that's still true? And so it's using it in a way that we don't rely on and therefore pass responsibility to it for making those decisions, but it explores our own creative space by getting it to say, I have previous examples of where this hasn't worked. And I think that's a kind of smarter, more human AI mix that might have more power than where we've used it before.
Yeah, I think so. It's really distinguishing AI use from it being a tool which could really stress test our ideas and hopefully find the vulnerabilities in maybe our thinking, our decisions, to where it's actually being used to replace judgment. And it's
Yeah,
a critical
yeah.
sounding board that we need to embrace, really.
Yeah, I mean, leading on from the previous talk with Tim, one of the things we touched upon but didn't really explore is what happens in human decision making if something goes wrong.
Mhm.
Is so, and I'm sure everyone tuned into this thing will have an experience either in their personal lives, but more often probably in the organizations they work in, where something's gone wrong and everybody starts pointing the other way. And there are two different kinds of things going on here. I'll come back to why AI is important in this context. So if something goes wrong in an institution, very often senior management will go, there's no cultural problem. There's nothing wrong with the management chain. It's just one or two bad apples, and we can either train them or get rid of them. And all that's been done. So we don't have a cultural problem. So there's a kind of, again, no responsibility taking for a cultural problem. Well, on the counter is that perhaps the employees who are the bad apples are being blamed in some sense in this way. They go, well, no, actually, I was just doing what the business wanted me to do, what management has expected me to do, and what is actually just the way you do business around here. And so you always get this diffusion of responsibility and deflection of responsibility. And if you have an AI decision-making tool in that loop, it's going to be blamed by both sides. It's the easiest thing to do under those circumstances to go, you know what, we used a bit of AI. Actually, it's from this supplier over here. We just kind of took its output and worked with it. So it's the cause of the problem now. And then you're back to, okay, how do you allocate causal responsibility with an AI system? Is it the developer? Is it the coder? Is it the what? And again, there's really interesting research in AI companies, particularly in the medical arena, where the coders and the people who are generating the AI tool in its own right, they've been interviewed and said, what happened if something goes wrong with a patient? And almost always it's, well, the human beings should have intervened. It was the consultants or the nurses or the doctors that should have. It wasn't the AI tool. Guys, don't blame me. So that kind of opportunity to pass responsibility to essentially an inanimate object is now greatly increased if you've got it making critical decisions in the workplace. And so that concerns me. That basic human, well, it was the AI that did it, boss, it is a real problem going forwards particularly in our industry and risk and compliance.
So I guess it's really amplifying the confirmation biases that we can see. So I know that social media is often blamed for creating echo chambers, but could this actually AI be more sophisticated if it's feeding us the information we want to hear? Does it make it harder to kind of like go against the script, the narrative and question things? Do you think it means that we could lose our ability to trust our own intuition, our own gut sense? Do you think?
I think there is a danger. I know Tim calls this you kind of a loss of knowledge from as a kind of cognitive atrophy. Is that actually, if we have relied upon AI to do the basic tasks of our industry, so for imagine, we've all written policies in the past, and if all of us are honest, we've all looked at someone else's policy and gone, oh, okay, that's a good way of putting it. I'll just lift that. I suspect we have all seen, I know I have several times, policies that have been written to us, but where someone has failed to cut and paste the previous organization's name out of that policy. And heaven forbid that might have been come through my desk at any time. But however, that's what kind of AI is doing, but it's doing it better. Is it's synthesizing all of that basic knowledge into a policy or a procedure or something, because it's seen lots of those before, lots and lots and lots of those before. So it might well get to the point where you've got a kind of cognitive de-skilling. Now, the only analogy I can make to this is mechanization in the Victorian Industrial Revolution. Odd leap, I think you say, but actually it's quite similar what happened. So no longer did people knit or weave in their own homes. That happened in factories because it was mechanized on a very large scale. And so essentially, most of us have now lost the ability to make and mend our own clothes. Similarly, cooking. In certainly with my parents, we cooked a lot at home. Nobody does this anymore. And so, and where do you end up with that? Well, you perhaps end up with an ultra processed food problem, where people don't know how to produce the basics of their own food. And the analogy there is, and so what happens if you start doing that and you mechanize thought? Do we actually stop having the basic ability to do some of the entry level things in our industry or in our professions that actually we just took for granted when we were coming up with training? That actually, you would spend an awful lot of time writing policies and editing procedures and you would spend an awful lot of time to do that. And it was just a kind of induction process. Whereas if we're devolving that out, we might lose that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, well, no one will ever have been through the actual pain or understanding of how you make a policy appropriate to the people that you're talking to. How do you cut it down so it's understandable? You're just being lazy and allowing AI to do it. I think we might well get to the point where some of the basic cognitive tasks that we have given to AI start an attritional process where actually we forget how to do some of these basic things. And then you're in the position of perhaps the only learning database an AI has anymore has been generated essentially by itself. All of the basic patterns that have been generated, all of the basic ideas are now coming from an AI, not from a human being. And so it's learning from the patterns it's generated itself. And that's a big, I don't know where that goes. I don't know where you end with that. But there is at least a little bit of this where actually we may lose some of the cognitive abilities that we are relying on to do the more higher level functions in our jobs.
Mm. I suppose there could be a real generational impact on this because obviously now AI's come in. So
Yeah.
those people graduating and starting their careers now, they could they could start it with AI. So is that going to lead to a possibility of having a whole generation of future leaders, future executives who maybe excel at writing AI prompts, but they're going to struggle to reason independently?
There were already some studies on how students, both high performing and medium performing and low performing students, behave when given the opportunity of using an AI to assist in those. So what is obviously beginning to happen, it's a real challenge in education, and the ICA will know that more than anybody else, is it's kind of leveling the playing field in the sense that actually some of the less able students it's now
Mm.
capable of getting an AI to write some interesting text for them and then using that to base their work. And interestingly, what that means is the higher performing students, there is pressure on them to use AI in the same way because the gap between high performing and low performing is now so narrowed by the use of AI that it's very difficult to distinguish yourself in the workplace on these things. Very difficult to do that, and it kind of brings me to a point about the uses of AI and the pressure that it will place on human beings. Because one of the preponderances we have when we are excusing ourselves for having done something bad, it's called moral disengagement. It's the stories we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night, essentially. One of the preponderances is to dehumanize the victims that we do. Yeah, I know. Yeah, of course I did it. Of course I cheated it. Of course I stole it. But the customers, if they don't read the fact finds, well, they're just idiots, aren't they? And we've all heard people explain things as actually they're not sentient human beings who we have to care about, and actually they're just greedy or forgetful or tired or boring or whatever. That dehumanizing description allows us to say, actually, I wasn't really doing that to a human being. They were just idiots, so they deserved it. Imagine that actually you have, let's take a real example, an AI recruitment algorithm, and everybody knows it's an AI recruitment algorithm. When you manipulate your CV or change the answers that the AI recruitment algorithm is looking at, you are already doing it to an already dehumanized thing. You're not really cheating anybody, you're just playing the computer's game. And so it changes from a psychological point of view. Remember, this is behavioral science, right? It changes the way you look at what you've just done. If you lie on a CV and you hand it to a human being, you are actually lying to a human being. If you lie on your CV and hand it to an AI algorithm, I kind of care less. It's
Mm.
only, I mean, it's only if the computer algorithm wasn't written to spot it, well, hey, dehumanize. So, there are all sorts of very subtle psychological behavioral things that happen when you stick an AI in the loop. It's not the same as behaving with a human being. It's actually slightly easier to bend the rules and slightly easier to justify gaming the whole algorithm.
That's absolutely fascinating. I'm just aware of the time, so I'm going to
Sure.
at the questions that have come through,
Yeah,
and
great.
there's quite a few. I've got a comment here from Walter. Thanks so much for sending these through. Without restrictions on AI to recognize more nuanced, subtle actions as illegal, such actions may constitute a form of economic or corporate espionage, IP fraud, or advising to commit fraud.
Yeah,
Um,
I think what that's a really good point because, of course, AI is making these decisions without any moral code in its own right embedded in it. So, for example, if you find this in medicine a lot, is if it's making a diagnostic choice, for example, on the basis of a DNA profile or some scan results or whatever, it will just make the diagnostic choice. It won't be able to say, but this is a vulnerable human being. There's only a 10% chance of this person developing this illness. Their family situation is not great in terms of their mental support. It won't take that human context into consideration. And so there's quite a lot of work currently going on to build those kinds of things onto the back of an AI program, but it's extremely difficult because that's what we're great at.
Mhm.
We're great at that rich human behavioral thing. And so, in some ways, building a kind of conscience into AI is devolving the responsibility the wrong way.
Yeah.
Is that it allows you, if it makes a mistake, you can even more blame it because you say, well, it didn't just make some stupid decisions. It actually even, it's supposed to have a moral code, but it didn't. So you're absolutely right that actually some of the decisions, although beneficial by certain parameters, don't take into account the human and social and moral and ethical dilemmas that might cause. So, but really good spot.
I've got another comment here from Damir. AI will transform compliance, but human skills, critical thinking, contextual judgment, ethical reasoning will define whether this transformation is effective or risky. I think that really does that does really hit the spot on the deployment of AI.
That is so eloquent. I wish I'd said that. I really my that is so much more literate than I could have put it. You're absolutely right. The mediation that we have to make between what is a logical decision and what might be a best human decision is really very, very important. And write that phrase down. And if he doesn't mind, I'll use that in future because it's a super way of putting what we've got here.
I think on the same vein, I've got another message from Karen who says that the default setting should be to look for confirmation from peers and not AI. My brain is more creative when I talk to real people. I think that's the danger. We start to trust AI more than our peer group.
Absolutely right. It, there is to go back to where we started with Tim, though. That's only true if the team around you isn't an echo chamber. If
Yeah.
you have a team around you that has a safe space to go, I don't think you're right about that, or have you thought about that, or to challenge it, then that really works. And in one-on-one conversations, you can say, look, tell me what you think. I won't, tell me my baby's ugly. I won't mind about that. All that kind of stuff. That's a brilliant space in which to do it. Many teams don't operate like that. Many
Mm.
teams are just an echo chamber, and they're self-fulfilling, and they do confirmation bias, as you just mentioned, which means that actually, even in those environments, using AI to bolt you out, to jog you out of that zone might be a useful circumstance. But mostly you're right. Most of the really interesting stuff that I get comes from the creative ideas from my colleagues, not from ChatGPT or Copilot or any of those kind of things.
Yeah, I would second that absolutely. Another comment here from Walter is that language is very limited, a very limited means to describe the world around us. It lacks nuance, objectivity, and completeness. We can so easily disagree on the simplest task or object. Will AI ever move beyond language as a primary base or understanding mechanism for reasoning?
I mean, I'm not an AI specialist, but it's a really interesting comment. In some ways, it already has. If you look at the use of AI in graphics and design, for example, or in creative writing or music, then AI is already using non-written language to generate the outputs it requires. It's particularly true in design and imaging. And of course, there's a huge copyright problem about all of that. Many of the people in the performing arts are really quite cross about the fact that all the materials have now been just sampled and used, and AI has learned from it without really giving them any credit at all. So I think it already has begun to do that. But you're absolutely right. We are currently in the world of having to write essentially computer programs to control the output of a computer program. In order to get to do anything even slightly more complicated than simply than some of the simple things you use it for, there are prompt creating guidelines and frameworks that says, oh, say this. One of the things that it always comes up in that is, oh yeah, and if you're going to reference any papers, they have to be real papers. Uh, where in the human world would you have to tell a human being not to make stuff up? It's just a really odd thing. But I get you. I get you. There is a limit to what we can describe in words, and but AI can already synthesize pictures, videos, sounds. It's a richer world than we think already, I think.
Yes. Final question here. In an AI-enabled environment, what is the compliance professional's unique role in ensuring that human skills such as judgment, accountability, and ethical reasoning are maintained as the last line of defense?
I
Great.
think that's a really great question. Super question. I think it comes down to applying the test of humanity against what the output it is. Um, in simple terms, we've all come across rules and regulations that didn't pass the granny test, which was so how would you explain the outcome of that to your granny? Could you do that? Is it ethically right to do that when you've got vulnerable human beings in the loop, or the consequence if you let's take a financial crime implication, if the implication of that is actually we are opening our doors to increased financial crime or drug dealing, or we are encouraging the wrong behaviors in the world. I think that will remain a human filter for a very long time. I'm terribly skeptical about the work that's going on to try and add that sort of thing into an automated process. We will always be there to say, actually, if you take the diagnosis example, is it right to tell someone that you've picked up the fact that they're carrying a gene for a genetic disorder that will only get expressed 10% of the time.
Mm.
In a medical situation, for example, it might not be the right thing to tell someone that they're carrying that, because human
Mm.
beings tend to become their diagnosis, even though it will never express itself. And it's that kind of subtle interpretation of what is essentially a wonderful piece of AI that will make all the difference in the future. And I think you're absolutely right.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. So, Paul, thank you
Wow.
so much for joining me today. That's absolutely flown by. I knew it would. And our next In Conversation takes place in 2 weeks' time. And I think Tim Tyler is going to be talking about the role of the MRLO in 2 weeks' time. But for now, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of day wherever you are in the world.
Bye,
Goodbye for
everyone.
now.
Bye, everyone.